You know what we love about Mondays? One of our favorite features.
Yeah, it's time to stick that little pinky finger out because it's time to sip on Scripture. It's sipping on Scripture with the one, the only Shayne Stanfield. Good morning to you, Shayne. How are you this morning?
Good morning, guys. I'm doing well. And yourself?
Great.
Doing fabulous.
Happy
I'll speak
Monday.
for Ron and I this morning. Yeah.
Couldn't be better.
Well, today we are sipping on Scripture with the readings for Monday of the third week of Lent. Familiarity breeds contempt. Have you ever heard this saying?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well, today's gospel reading that comes to us from the 4th chapter of Luke is the second half of a story which happens to be an excellent biblical example of that old saying. You might recall this story as the rejection at Nazareth, and it begins with Jesus at his hometown synagogue on the Sabbath, standing to read a messianic passage from the scroll of Isaiah. Jesus then sits down, and with all eyes looking intently his way, he simply tells the crowd that this particular passage has been fulfilled. At first, they were amazed to hear this, and they all spoke highly of Jesus, but then they began to cast doubt that he was in fact the Messiah, as they rhetorically questioned that he was the son of Joseph. That's the familiarity component of this account. Most of those people knew Jesus his entire life as nothing more than a carpenter who simply followed in the footsteps of his father Joseph, who they also knew as nothing more than a carpenter. And we clearly see how this familiarity begins to breed contempt in a crowd with a form of skepticism that borders on mockery with their rhetorical style of questioning. So Jesus responds to this by predicting that they would ask him for proof by performing for them the same miracles that he performed elsewhere. But he then points out that no prophet is accepted in his known native place. He continues by reminding them of the prophets Elijah and Elisha, who both had to travel to foreign lands to provide blessings to Gentiles who were suffering just like the Israelites because it was only the Gentiles that had sufficient faith. This infuriated those in the synagogue because they were being confronted with the fact that they were lacking in faith just like their ancestors, and that they would not receive any of the blessings that the others with faith had received. The contempt of the crowd at this point turned physically violent as they led Jesus out of town to the brow of a hill from which they intended to throw him down, before he then seems to miraculously escape their fury without harm. I previously spoke about this kind of unhinged reaction that people often have when they're confronted with inconvenient truths, and that was during this morning segment last summer regarding the same gospel passage. But what sticks out to me today is not the difficulty with the message as much as it is the difficulty with our familiarity of the messenger. And that problem we often find taking comfort in the fixed identities and expectations of others. I first started thinking about the mental gymnastics these folks in the synagogue must have had to try to perform in light of the radical distortions of reality that they were presented. They had heard plenty of eyewitness testimony of the miracles that Jesus had been performing elsewhere, and then he essentially states rather boldly right there in front of them that he was truly the Messiah. But they simply can't get past their fixed identity of Jesus as being the simple carpenter that they had always known, and their fixed expectation that he couldn't possibly be anything else. Furthermore, was the common belief that the Messiah was some sort of powerful and glorious warrior that would be wielding the mighty hand of God to crush the enemies of Israel, to finally set the Jewish people free from oppression once and for all. These preconceived notions clearly worked all together to create not just a limitation in understanding, but also an impasse at acceptance, which only grace through faith could overcome in order for them to recognize the spiritual realities at hand. And those who might think that this sort of problem was only biblical simply failed to know almost 2,000 years of church history, particularly as experienced by anyone who had to overcome various forms of persecution for their faith. Take, for instance, the recent surge of adults entering the Catholic Church, and know that the chances are quite high that each and every one of them will have difficulties with at least one friend or family member as the direct result of their conversion. Everyone has lived a past that's less than Catholic, it's less than what the Catholic Church calls us to live. And it's our friends and family members that tend to know this fact more than anyone else, including even the most personal of details. That's the familiarity part. But then comes those grace-filled moments, and the Catholic convert begins to walk away from the ways of the world in which these friends and family members still happily participate, and who may now feel more inclined more than ever to defend. These friends and family members do not see or understand the significance of the spiritual transformation that has taken place, and as a result of this, various forms of contempt for the Catholic convert begin to emerge. I think this contempt is likely to be even worse for the Catholic convert who walks away from another faith tradition in which these friends and family members remain committed. The deeper their commitment, the greater their zeal to defend it. In any event, contempt from any friend or family member has the potential to be far more hurtful than any contempt from others. So on that note, always remember that familiarity breeds contempt. Pray for those converts coming into the church this Easter, and pray for yourself to be extra forgiving toward your own friends and family if necessary.
Boy, and we also pray for those who are leading them and teaching them, like you, and and Dave does that as well. And for all those on RCIA teams or OCI teams that are sponsors as well, and those that are ushering and accompanying these folks into the church.
Yes, yeah, and it's a big step. It's a big leap for many. And having done this myself 13 years ago this Easter, and I've had my share of run-ins with that contempt that people have. It's almost as if who are you're no better than I am, or I know your past, and who makes you holier than me. And it's this, these thoughts that came through my mind this time. I've read this scripture reading a number of times, obviously, and again, I spoke about this last summer, but took a whole different twist on this at this point in time, because primarily with these students that I have coming through the OCI, I should say, finishing up the OCIA program, coming into the church this Easter, and again, it's I think a fool would think that they're not going to have at least one a person in their life that's going to give them grief. Maybe not now, but at some point in the future. It's like, why did you do that? And it's this lack of understanding of what they're moved in their spiritual life to to make that change.
Yeah, I think it was Pope Francis who said, no matter the conflict, don't throw people off the brow of the hill. Just get through the conflict. It's okay. No, seriously. I mean, and this is the thing. I think about this going back to the story. These town folk, these people that Jesus grew up with, they hear about the stories that are going on with Jesus, and they're anticipating his arrival, right? With some excitement, with curiosity, of course. And then he doesn't present himself as this person that they want him to be, this military leader, this one that's going to set them free, blah, blah, blah. And then of course, they're reminded of his state, of the state of his father, carpenters, and all of that stuff, and they just say, no, it can't be. It can't be. So they go from this curiosity to wanting to kill him.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me of how broken we are, right? And then it goes back exactly to what you and Ron are saying, that, boy, the difficulty with these men and women coming into the Catholic Church, you wouldn't think that people who love them would present them with such heated conflict, but they will. Why? Because we're broken. And boy, when we get disturbed, we can do some things that just are beyond what we think we're capable of.
Well, I have to giggle when I read this passage, because they're begging him for a miracle. One of these miracles that they've heard about, and right. I think he performed the miracle for them right there, and they didn't even know. I mean, he's being carried out of town to be thrown down a hill, and he just slips away.
Walks right through it. Yeah. They're angry about that one.
Yes, yeah.
That's not the miracle that they wanted. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
We had another miracle in mind. Come on. Yeah, that's good stuff. We're praying for everybody, because to your point, for those coming in, they've got the crosses that each of them are bearing, even as they come to this great place of celebration. So
and they become defenders of the faith. So.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Shayne.
Thank you.
Beautiful job. Yeah.